Hello, everyone. Welcome to React Roundup, the podcast where we keep you updated on all things React related. We have a bunch of new hosts in the show, so this is going to be fresh for all of you that are listening for a very long time. And yeah, let's get into it. So this show is produced by two companies, Top End Devs and Envoy. Top End Devs is where we create top end devs to get top end pay and recognition while working on interesting problems and making meaningful community contributions. And Envoy, which offers remote design and software development services on a performance basis. So clients only pay when tasks are delivered and approved. My name is Lucas Paganini. I'm the founder of Envoy and one of the hosts in the podcast today. And joining me in today's episode is first the one and only Charles Maxwood.
Yeah, old host, same as the new host, same as the old. I started this show way back when, and helped host it for the first 3 years. So anyway, I'm back. Good to see y'all.
The king is back. Yeah. And we also have some new faces around here. Well, my voice is probably new to a lot of people, but we also have Peter Osah.
Yeah, hello everyone. Peter Osah. So it's nice meeting everyone in the panelists. Yeah, it's great to talk about React stuff with you all. Yeah.
Great to have you, Peter. And we also have Chris Frewin.
Yep. Hi everyone. Super happy to be here. Very excited to get into this episode and future episodes.
Awesome. Okay, so we have very high caliber professionals here. They're probably all smarter than me. So I'm going to introduce the topic and rely on their intelligence for us to really have depth into this episode. So we were talking about how we deploy our single page applications. Of course, we're going to talk more specifically about React, but I imagine that a lot of what we're going to talk about here today is going to apply to a lot of folks who are using other frameworks. So you might be using Vue or anything actually, really any single page application framework would probably benefit from the things that we're going to discuss here today. And yeah, so we're going to talk about how we deploy our single page applications. So I'm going to just get things rolling and say that thus far I've been a very happy Heroku customer for the front end. I don't think Heroku is the most cost-effective alternative, but it is so easy to get things deployed into Heroku. There are many other alternatives that also make it easier nowadays, but I know that I sound young, but I'm actually quite old. So back in the days, Heroku was the easiest one. And the other ones were not as close as easy as Heroku. And I just stick to it. So I think it serves me well for most projects. But I've been looking a lot into Cloudflare pages because it's a serverless alternative, which means that if my website isn't being accessed as much, I don't have to pay for a dedicated server, which is a problem that I have currently with Heroku. Even if like my super old website is not being accessed anymore, I'm still having to pay for it, which I think could be a better use of my money if I could spend it somewhere else. So I would like to pay on a performance basis, but also I can also have scalability issues because if I really have like millions of users trying to access my website at the same time, I'm going to have to go into Heroku and increase my DNOs, which is the name that they give to the servers. But if I go with the serverless approach, I don't have to worry about scalability at all. So that sounds really interesting to me. Gotta be honest, I haven't migrated yet, but I'm really interested in the benchmarks I've seen so far. And yeah, I wanted to know what is the experience that you guys have with that, and if you think that this would be a good move, or if I'm setting myself for failure if I go that route.
My experience is totally different, so I'm curious what Peter and Chris have to say.
Okay, yeah. So my experience, Heroku, Yeah, Heroku is very great. Yeah, like it's actually very awesome. Although, yeah, but I'm kind of like a fan of like Netlify for just static
Mhm.
pages. So I think I'm that kind of guy. So just okay, once I connect Netlify to my repo, I can just build the application and then boom, it's up. So I just love how simplistic it is. Yeah, and then there's still the old-fashioned way of GitHub and trying to do some configurations on how to set up like those SPAs and how to kind of like build it and then push it up to GitHub pages. But then, yeah, I think I'm a bit biased to Netlify. And then Vercel came along, so I'm still a fan of Vercel as well too. It's kind of very easy, especially for Next.js applications. So it's just so easy. Yeah, I think well, Heroku, yeah, I when I started with SPAs, I kind of used Heroku then when it was kind of free tier for like little projects and so on. Kind of enjoyed it as well. Then I think subsequently then I found Netlify and then started loving it. Yeah, so Chris, what do you think? What do you think is like
Y-
an option?
Yes. So actually, I am more on page with you. I'm also a huge Netlify fan. Typically, like when I write about it or talk about it, I always say that it almost feels like stealing because they're so generous with the build time, and I think you can have. I don't even know if there is a site limit, but it's yeah, they make it super easy. With that said, though, I did start also back back in the days, like Lucas on Heroku, and I think, at least in my mind or what I remember, Heroku has a more you have like access to your terminal and everything, which you maybe have as well with Netlify, but Netlify is much more, I think, is much more for maybe someone who is more like a sysadmin type person, where it's really like point and click. Whereas Heroku, you can kind of drill down and get more into the technical stuff. Um, but yeah, like you, Peter, like I think I moved away because I believe they took away the free tier entirely
Mhm.
not too long ago, maybe
Yeah,
a year ago,
yeah, I
two
think
ago.
that's kind of messed everything up. Like, there's so many guys, like, I know so many guys were like, oh, they love Heroku and they just want to spin it up for a little side project they were working on. Boom, the free tier was gone, and they were like, oh no. And then start seeing Vercel and other options, and yeah, they just jumped on it. So I think that was kind of like the main hindrance for men because yeah, it was really nice. Like it's free alternative for small projects. Like I remember in the days where for React app, for even my Node.js backend projects, little projects, I could just spin it up and then boom. Yeah. But I think that was like a limiter at first. What do you
Mhm.
think, Lucas? Do you think the free tier affected any of its use at any point?
Oh man, you really needed to go there, right? Like that. I was almost closing that wound. But yeah, you're right. I did felt that. I did felt that. I know that we're not supposed to rely on free stuff. I mean, there's always somebody doing the work. So if we really want to use it, we should be paying something to for the value that we're getting. But honestly, they made me used to the free servers, and then when they took it away, I was like, oh come on! Like there's so much that I'm gonna have to pay now. But one thing that I really like about Heroku is that it allows me to push entire Docker containers. I don't know if
Uh-huh.
that's an option for Netlify because, as you said, I always saw Netlify as more of a platform as a service. So, as you were saying, it doesn't give me much control over the infrastructure, which it might be just a misunderstanding from my end because I haven't really used Netlify that much. So I don't want to put Netlify in a position of saying, "Hey, Lucas, everything that you're saying is wrong," because it might just be. I've never used it for production applications, but I know that Heroku allows me to push Docker containers, and I really like that because I tend to always containerize everything that I'm doing, even if it's just the front end, even just front end applications. My experience has always been to containerize it as much as possible. It just makes all the other parts of my continuous integration pipeline easier to do because if I can containerize my application, then I can just substitute one project for the other and reuse all the other setup that I have for continuous integration, like running my end-to-end tests with Cypress and building, serving, etc. So I really like that, and I really like the consistency of knowing that if it's working on my local Docker container, it's going to be working the same way in the cloud environment. So I try to stay away from those smart algorithms that you just like integrate your GitHub repository and they see that it has a package JSON, so they understand that it's Node and they automatically build and serve. I try to avoid that because I am a freak for control. So I really wanted to be sure of what I was deploying. So yeah, I really like when I can just deploy a Docker container, but I know that if I go into a serverless path, I won't be able to have that. So this is being my current um, question, right? So would it make sense for me to give up control to have that speed and scalability and ease of serverless? Or do I still want to have control and have Docker containers? And by the way, one of the things that also make me want to have Docker containers instead of just a regular static serve is because I almost always use server-side rendering, and it's not always just a pre-rendered or pre-generated static website. There's always some pages that are indeed dynamic and they need to be dynamically rendered. So I can't just serve static files. I really need to have a little bit more power on the server to make sure that the pages that need to be dynamically rendered are dynamically rendered on the server. So I don't know if that changes for you guys, if your experience is more like just relying on client-side rendering, or if you also had this experience with server-side rendering and how you tackle that.
So I'm going to jump in because you made me feel less weird, because we're all talking about, deploying to something like Heroku, which my first experience with Heroku was when they initially launched. They were an online IDE for Ruby on Rails, and then they pivoted and did the push to deploy. And so I've been using Heroku for years and years and years and years. There are definitely things I like about Heroku, but yeah, it's usually the cost that keeps me off of it. I'm not willing to pay for it. I was a sysadmin before I was a programmer, and so I'm pretty comfortable going, I'm just going to set up a server to run this myself. And so I've done that before. You With the front end frameworks, you don't have to do that nearly as often. But anyway, what I tend to do is, I tend to reach for Docker for my deployments. I'm typically writing Rails and React if I'm writing React. And so a lot of times the deployment is effectively whatever build system's built into Rails pointed at my React files, and it just, it deploys it as part of the assets. And so a lot of the deployments have just been, kind of a standard thing. And, we've gone through all the stages where, initially it just kind of, put a digest on your JavaScript files. This is before React. Once React kind of came around, then we had Webpack integrated with Rails, which was a huge pain in the neck because Webpack. And it was better than the alternatives at the time, but now we've got much better alternatives, I think, than Webpack. But yeah, so you would just, when you deployed it, just installed all the libraries for Rails. You had Node installed on your server. It did the build. It put it where Rails could find it, and then you just pointed your app at that, and then it would hit your APIs on your Rails app. The other thing that I'm starting to get into now, and this is part of launching the React Geniuses, which is going to be the video series and the meetups, is I want to build apps in kind of the big major frameworks. And so I've started playing with Redwood.js, and I'm still of the opinion that I want to do most of this with Docker containers. And I've been using the new Rails tool for that. And it's called Kamal. And effectively what it does is you have Docker containers that are built with your app in it. And so it knows how to build, right? Which is what Lucas is talking about. But the difference between using it to push to something like Heroku versus using Kamal is you go and you set up servers on um, DigitalOcean or Linode or something like that. And then what it does is it actually logs into that machine. It installs Docker on it if it doesn't already have it. And then it updates the images for you as you go. And so then you deploy it. You have your secrets on your local dev machine. You push it all up. It does the thing. There's also a way to integrate that with like 1Password if you want your secrets in 1Password. And so so it does all the build and push and deploy and everything like that. And so that's kind of the way that I've been rolling lately. I will say though that it's really nice deploying to something like Netlify or Vercel, where they have kind of they know how to build these apps. And so effectively what you wind up doing is you say, push it up to Vercel, and Vercel says, oh, I know what to do with this. And it builds it for you. And so then, unless you've got something a little bit different going on outside of the norm, which most people don't, it just happily does it for you. So there are definitely trade-offs. The Heroku thing is another, if you don't want to fuss with your server setup, right? They manage all that stuff. I wind up, the only other drawback, I guess, to Heroku versus some of the other ones is that I feel like I wind up paying for Heroku and like 6 add-ons on any app that I run on it. And so, but I've been doing contract work. So if I have a client, right, who isn't going to pay me ongoing whatever to maintain their app, then Heroku is actually the way that I go, because then nobody has to figure anything out, right? If they have a problem with it running and I get hit by a bus, they can call Heroku and say my app isn't running, and Heroku may be able to help them out. So anyway, that's kind of the long and the short of how I do deployments, which is different, I think, than most of the people in the React community.
Yeah, one thing I also wanted to say about things like Netlify, 99% of the time you can just rely on however they're, like Lucas said, they're reading your NPM. But if you really want to get into the weeds, they have this TOML file, and you can define, I mean, you can't do everything, but you can define quite a few things. Like if you need, I don't know, if you change domains or something and you need some custom redirects. And I actually needed it recently. It wasn't in the TOML file, but one of the environment flags, because so I'm primarily a Gatsby guy, so not quite SBA, but building multi-page sites with React. And it's quite a big site, and I needed to bump, like there's a built-in environment variable for the memory that it uses when building, so I needed to bump that up. But yeah,
I faced that too.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, I would wonder. I don't believe you can do Docker or anything like that, but I don't know. Maybe Peter could speak a bit to that, but I don't have experience with that. Just with a TOML file. So.
Yeah, I don't think it gives that much like ability, kind of. So it's just mostly, I think that's where he actually shines very well. And I think so Charles mentioned Kamal, and it's really actually interesting. I think I read it from a post from the creator of Google. I think is I don't want to forget his name. Chris or so. Yeah, so it's actually a nice tool. So, but apparently, I think one thing about why I actually prefer Netlify, I think is based on my use case. So most of the time, I usually like to bundle, like just ensure my applications are just like static. So if I'm maybe trying to do some other kind of gymnastics or whatever configuration I need, I just limit it to that kind of it, because I actually feel maybe it's best to just bundle the JavaScript, just build it and bundle it and then just push it out. So I think it's just my philosophy though. So I've really not seen the case. So most of the time there may be usually cases for me to actually just try to explore maybe other options. But I feel it's just based on how I think about the application. I just want to build it and just maybe it's something someone can just this is the file, push it to Vercel, push it to the file. Something, it's just ease of use in my own opinion. Yeah, I don't know if you have any So Lucas, I think you said something about you're using, like, for all your projects using Docker, like you always Dockerize your applications, put front end on. So is it you did for all the applications, both your side projects or your company projects or so? Like, I just want to know if it's for all the applications you work on, or it's just for specific types.
Okay, so actually, it's for all of them. I don't remember any project that I haven't containerized everything. Yeah, it's for every project. It's for company projects, for personal projects. I always containerize everything. There are definitely some projects I've worked on in which I was not the person that did the architecture, and they were not containerizing the front end, which I just left it as it is and worked in the way that they were already doing it. But every time that I had control over the architecture, I went to the route of containerizing it. But now, like, so, okay, my backends are always definitely going to be containerized. I don't see myself migrating the backends in which I'm architecturing to like a fully serverless approach or something like that. I really think that there's much more benefit in containerizing the backends and having that level of control over the backend, because it's generally not as straightforward as front-end builds and front-end deployments. Also,
That makes sense to me. I primarily do backend. That makes a lot of sense to me.
yeah.
I think for backend is a no-brainer. You just have to.
Mhm.
I feel.
But I actually am reconsidering my position on that for the front end, because in the back end, I generally don't have a single monolithical application in the back end. Like sometimes I do, but in other cases, I have a bunch of microservices and I want to deploy them and orchestrate them in the cloud. So, of course, it makes a lot more sense to use Docker containers in that case and containerize the entire thing, and don't use a platform that it is so simple in that sense, that doesn't give you all the control that you want to orchestrate and take care of the scalability of your backend. But it's like, it's not even the same chart, right? If you think of the chart of how your application connects, and you think about every piece that makes the backend work, they're really not connected to the front end. Like, they're completely separate environments and separate servers. And for the front end to scale, we really only need to put a load balancer and throw as many servers as we want, because we're never gonna do multiple services or microservices for a front end server. Like, why would you ever want to purchase that complexity just to serve a front end, right? So this is why I really think that front ends are an excellent candidate for serverless, because every single drawback the serverless has is irrelevant for front end deployment. Like, what I see people complaining the most about serverless is the difficulty to debug and to see what's going on, to understand the flow of data. And also, it comes to a point where you're deploying 400 Lambda functions and you're just crazy trying to understand what's calling what. But if you're going to deploy front end using serverless, then you're just going to deploy one function into one cloud environment, and that's it. You're done. You're not going to do anything else besides that. So I actually think I'm doing it wrong in terms of front-end deployment specifically. But for backend, I would definitely keep the structure that I have. And by the way, just one note, Chuck, you were mentioning the cost of Heroku add-ons. I never used any Heroku add-on. I always used other options. And what I really like about Heroku is that they don't have their own data centers. I know that might sound really weird. Like, what I like the most is the fact that they don't have something. But the thing is, because they don't have their own, like DigitalOcean has their own data centers.
Yes.
Because Heroku doesn't, they use AWS.
Use AWS, yeah.
Which is great to me, because I can host my main application in Heroku, but I can host my Redis and MongoDB on AWS, and I'm not going to have any latency because it's in the same data center. So this is what I always did. Instead of using the Heroku add-ons, I would plug everything else from AWS. So for example, I may use Mongo Atlas, which is a managed service for MongoDB, and you can host that on AWS. And I might use Redis Labs, which is a managed
I see where you're
service for
going.
Redis, and I host it on AWS. And then my main container is on Heroku, which is also AWS. So
Right.
I don't have to use the add-ons from Heroku.
So you just make sure you're in the same region, and then your secrets point
exactly
to the other services.
exactly.
And so then Heroku just becomes a harness to deploy or manage your main app, and your accessories, which you have to manage on your own anyway, are all in AWS.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah,
That's
so
cool.
look, in an instance of changing regions, let's assume, I don't know, maybe this is just me being paranoid. Maybe there's a change of regions, and yeah, maybe today, Heroku just decides, oh, maybe no, we don't want to use AWS anymore. I just want to patronize maybe Linode or something on the service. Just in that instance, wouldn't that solution not? Yeah, because at the end of the day, they're going to be separate. Like I'm just looking at how spontaneous some changes could be, and so what do you think in that kind of situation? What would you do if there's a change at any point, maybe a massive change? Will you just start thinking of how to migrate out or how to look for a new solution or something?
Great question. I would definitely, if that happened, I would definitely fully migrate to AWS, which is where all my other add-ons, if we're calling them add-ons, are. Yeah, I would definitely migrate to AWS, and they would never do that out of the blue. They would definitely give us a lot of previous notice before doing that. So we would definitely have enough time to migrate. And I don't like that everything needs to be AWS. Okay, like let me make that clear. I don't like the AWS interface. It's so confusing. It's hard to explain to other developers on my team. I think it could be so much simpler. Jeff Bezos, if you're listening to this show, please, please, dude, like you have so much money, just hire one designer to make that simpler. Okay. So yeah, I definitely think it could be way simpler. And they have done some initiatives to simplify that. Like we have AWS Light Sail, which is a direct alternative to Heroku, where you can simply push one container and it's going to take care of serving that. You don't have to configure the DNS and a bunch of other settings yourself. It's simpler. It's still not as simple as Heroku, but it is way simpler than all the other ways in which you can host an application on AWS. But yeah, if that happened, I would migrate to AWS. What I really would like to do, if I could, would be to have my main application on DigitalOcean. And the only reason why I don't do that, and actually one of the reasons why I want to do that is the pricing. And the other is because DigitalOcean has the simplest Kubernetes managed service out there. Like if you compare deploying Kubernetes to DigitalOcean, AWS, Azure, and GCP, I haven't compared that to Linode, which I think they changed the name to Akamai or something like that. But I know that
Akamai bought them.
Akamai bought them. Yeah. So DigitalOcean is just so much simpler to deploy a Kubernetes cluster, and the pricing is a lot more friendlier too. But I don't deploy on DigitalOcean because I would have to get rid of Mongo Atlas, which is my managed service for MongoDB, because Mongo Atlas only allows me to serve on AWS, GCP, or Azure. And even if I put it in a very, very close data center, it's not going to be in the same data center. So I don't want that extra latency. So I would rather have more complexity on my plate to deploy everything in the same data center than using a different cloud provider and having my DB in a different data center.
Yeah, that sounds nice. I think that answered it a bit. Yeah, that's so. But then I think maybe let's look for an instance. Maybe we want to consider the cost. For example, oh yeah, let's assume like still the same case where the Heroku decides to actually just you know migrate or switch to another server. Maybe they want to patronize Linode and they just switch to them. Yeah, so if imagine if you're working on like a project on a business or a SaaS, let me use that example. Like the cost of migration and the cost of kind of moving that. Yeah, I know. Yeah, obviously costs are going to be there because you know it's a business and so many things will be involved. But then don't you consider that will be also cost because yeah, you have your they are switching data centers literally. It's going to affect the performance at a point. So you just have to switch maybe moving from here to another. Yeah, so in that instance, it's not better to just use the like the add-ons. Maybe Heroku moves and you're still okay. They'll handle the add-ons and so on. Like I don't know. What do you think about that?
I
Chris, I
actually
know.
think the opposite. I think that if you use the Heroku add-ons, then it makes migration much costlier because you're more locked into the platform. Like, okay, I can't use DigitalOcean because they are not gonna deploy on the same data center that is my Redis containers and my MongoDB. Okay, but I can choose from AWS, Azure, and GCP, and I can go to either of the three. And because everything is containerized, moving the application would be a breeze. And if I'm already outside, because every project starts as a monolith, and then if it really, really needs, then it becomes a microservice. So if it's a microservice and is using Kubernetes, is also pretty easy to migrate. So if you're a single monolithic application and it's containerized, you can go to any cloud provider that you want. It's very easy to migrate. If you have multiple containers and you're using Kubernetes, it's still pretty easy to migrate. What I avoid is every cloud provider specific solution. Like I would never advise for a new project to use CloudFormation because now you're stuck with AWS. Oh, now AWS is too pricey and you want to migrate to Azure or GCP. You can't. Like you can, but like the migration is going to be much harder because you have a bunch of orchestration rules that only work on AWS because you're using their proprietary tool to orchestrate your tech. So the same goes for the add-ons. I would never use the AWS managed. They don't have Redis, right? But they have an alternative to Redis that is like exactly the same thing, and I always forget the name. I would never use that because now I'm stuck with AWS. I would always use a managed Redis solution that is not specific to a cloud provider, but that allows me to deploy in whatever cloud provider I want, if that makes sense. And then if I want to migrate, everything in my application is ready for that migration. Even my scripts to provision cloud resources, I always use Terraform for that. So it's super easy to migrate if you're using Terraform. Like all your configuration is already, and it doesn't need to be Terraform. You could be using Pulumi. Like any infrastructure as code tool will do the trick. It's just having all your setup in your code base and making sure that you're not using anything that is specific to that vendor. And any migration is going to be easy as it could be. Saying that migration is easy would be a misunderstanding, but it's as easy as it could be.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. So Charles, what do you think? Like, do you have like any better way? Do you like? What do you think?
I mean, a lot of it just depends on how complicated your application is and what you're trying to do with it, right? I mean, I've put some toy apps up on, Netlify or what have you. But yeah, I tend to agree with Lucas to a certain extent. Um, I think there are certain levels of, um, how do we put it, like economy or whatever that you get from using the resources on AWS, right? In the AWS way, like they design them to work together. But I also agree that, yeah, if you ever have to move it, then yeah, you're kind of locking yourself in. So I think there's a lot of it depends in a lot of this stuff. I've also worked for larger companies that had their own data centers, right? Or had presence in data centers. And so then it was, provisioning resources was effectively calling the ops team and having them get you a server. So yeah,
That would
I
make me
think
scary.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, almost every time I've been in that situation, it was more of a pain to get my resources than it would have been if they had just said, "Here's your budget, go to AWS or whatever." But yeah, I'm also not a huge fan of the big cloud providers for most apps because most of the time what you're building out is pretty small and simple, and so you can get away with a lot of things. And so anyway, I guess I'm just putting a whole bunch of caveats around what Lucas pointed out in the way he does things because yeah, just do what works and evolve from there is kind of my approach. So, I'll add things in. I don't generally use Mongo, so the Mongo Atlas isn't an issue for me, but um, I I've been using Postgres forever and I've used the cloud hosted and I've used my own and it mostly just works. And so, okay, it looks like this would solve this problem we're starting to have with scaling or accessibility or whatever. And so, I'll pick up some other technology and add it in. And yeah, I think for most apps, for most companies, small to medium businesses, you probably get away with, you know, putting everything on one server and just kind of running it from there until you decide you need a service that does something different.
How about you,
That
Chris?
sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've done a few different things. I am very guilty of just running like without any containers. So I started like my first backends were like probably like I don't know 2015, 2016. So Docker was around, but like maybe I don't know, for some reason I didn't get into it. I'm slowly working on getting that because I do agree with Lucas. Like if you can get your applications to this, this Dockerized standpoint, then yeah, you could basically go anywhere, right? Or if you want your own service on premise, in the cloud, where you can move it around. So I experienced a little bit of that with the startup I was working with the last 2 years, and we were eventually going to migrate everything to, I think, Google. We chose GCP, I think, due to pricing. We found the pricing best for what we needed, but like yeah, that's what we experienced. We said, well, okay, if we can Dockerize everything on our current server, then it theoretically should work anywhere. But with what Chuck said, it's it's funny because a lot of people, I mean, it's fun to think about huge scale, right? Like millions and millions of users, and do we need load balancing and geographical servers and all this stuff? But it's amazing, at least in my opinion, nowadays, what if we were doing. We had Golang as our backend, I think Gin, and with just like 4 cores, you can handle a crazy amount of requests. The startup was in Switzerland, and they were on their version of Shark Tank, and so we already had done some load tests and stuff. But of course, you're always unsure like what's actually going to happen when the TV airing came. But yeah, it handled. I mean, we had I think 10,000 new users, and like we didn't even hit, I think, 50% capacity on any resource like memory or anything. So yeah, I'm definitely a fan of, I guess, like, yeah, the right tool for the right job. I mean, of course, I would argue it would have been nicer, like, for my applications, had I Dockerized it in the beginning, because I think we all know that, that like, when something breaks, you're SSHing onto the server and doing some debugging, and you don't know exactly where it is. But with Docker, at least you have a starting point, like, okay, did something in the container blow up, or something like that? Um, so yeah, I guess, I don't know really where I'm going with that, but I think it's like, start small and pick, the resources and things you think for the project, and you'd be surprised how much power small resources can manage. Um, yeah, and then go for there.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And just to reiterate, I know that we've talked a lot, so I know we're close to start to wrapping up the episode, but I really want to make it clear for everyone that is listening and thinking, what the hell are you guys talking about? I don't know anything about that. Like, don't worry. Like, my
Mhm.
first deployment, I think, was a PHP myadmin, so back in the day. So I didn't start out doing all those crazy things to make sure that the deployment was as scalable and as organized as possible and super flexible to move around. And if you put that as a requirement for your app to go live, if you don't have the expertise to do that quickly, then you might just not go live ever. So just get things deployed, grow from there. But if I could give one advice, is have that little voice in your head saying, am I locked with my current provider? Yes or no? And what could I do to make myself less locked in? I know stories of people that, like, they were using companies that were using AWS and their bill was super expensive, but they had everything organized in a way that it was so easy for them to migrate to GCP or Azure or any other cloud provider, that they didn't even had to, because they could negotiate with AWS a major price reduction. And if your company is like super locked in into your provider, if you get to a point where like investing a lot of money into the cloud provider, what leverage do you have to negotiate? Where are you going to tell them, hey, please reduce the bill or else I'm gonna stick with you? So that's not very compelling, right? But if you say, hey, my entire application is containerized, we're using Kubernetes to orchestrate, so we're not using your proprietary technology, uh, and plus even our cloud provisioning is already documented with infrastructure as code tool. So would you like to give me some discounts so that I can stay with your platform? That's a much, much better position to be in, right? But this is like so far in the future, so far in the future. You should not be worrying about that scenario when you're just starting out the project. So start out with whatever you know is the best you can do quickly, and then grow from there. But just be mindful while you're growing, be mindful of every decision that you make, because every architectural decision that you make from the moment you start and while you're growing is going to make it easier or harder for you to migrate to a better cloud environment in the future. So yeah.
Yeah, that's actually true. So it's actually best to consider, like, ensuring that you're not kind of locked into your vendor. Very important, because most services, like, for example, I actually reference David's post on his migration from, I think, AWS to their to its own personal cloud. I think 36 signals, right? I really loved that series because I kind of followed it, and I was kind of wondering how, like, because the move was so smooth. I know a lot of people that use Hey, the email service. and there was like no downtime. They didn't really experience much. I was like, whoa, did you guys really move? Like, I was really fascinated about the fact usually a move usually could cause some certain things. Maybe customers will complain, oh, the service is down here, this and that. But it was so smooth. So yeah, I think it's actually based on what you said. So I think they ensured that they were not locked into their vendor. So when they made the move, it was so easy to just plug out and plug into their own customized server. So it wasn't really a biggie for them. Like they just moved that, and no, I don't think any of their customers just noticed that until they made the announcement that hey, we've moved. And I think Charles, I don't know if you followed the I think the meetup in I think in the Netherlands or so, Ruby on Ways, where there was a
Rails World.
presentation. Yes, Rails World, yeah. Where there
Yeah, I
was
was
a
there.
presentation. Yes, exactly. And we're like, I think it was like a countdown where I think it was Fernando or someone on their team that was trying to remove the last close the last server. And like that was really fun. Like I was like, whoa, like wow, so much preparation and kind of thought put into the code. So they were able to just switch out and there was really no difficulty. I think they did it on stage. I think Charles was probably there, so he can kind of explain better how it happened. So it's actually very vital that we don't become like vendor locked in. So I think I understand that very well, kind of. Yeah. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Lucas mentioned too, like, and what you're saying is, yeah, this vendor lock can be a headache. Also, like if you're a beginner, don't worry about it. But as you build your stuff, I think a big part of this could be perhaps its own episode about like some of these is documentation, right? So even if it may seem trivial, something small, but I'm telling you now, I know from experience, if you forget, like, oh yeah, this service here talks to this service, and you only remember that by seeing when the bug shows up. Yeah, so document, these whatever it is, interfaces or how services talk to each other, because that helps so much, and would hopefully lead to these much smoother transitions between vendors. So
Yep. That was a lot. I think we can start wrapping up before we get to 2 hours of podcast. Actually, if I may say just one last thing regarding the subject is vendor lock-in is not just about cloud providers. For example, recently, I was thinking about links that I had in some of the projects, like when you have links pointing to external services. For example, a lot of companies use Calendly, for example, to handle the bookings. So Calendly is going to generate a scheduling link. If you put that link directly into your website and you use that in your emails, in your documents, etc., you won't ever be able to change that link ever. Like if you want to change the system that you're using to book your meetings, you can't, because you're going to be worried about every single sales material that you sent in the past with the previous link. So even for that, it makes sense for you to think about vendor lock-in. It's even in those scenarios. And in that case, what you could do is use a link management system, and then you could have like a vanity link that redirects to the tool that you're actually going to be using. And then if you ever want to migrate, you can just migrate where the link is pointing. But yeah, these are just things that we need to keep in mind as we're building our system. So it's not just locked into your cloud provider, it's being locked into any external tool that your company depends on. And think about how would you handle a migration to another tool if you ever need to face that situation, because I'm telling you, you're most definitely going to face that situation. The only scenario where you're not going to have to worry about migration is if your company dies. So you don't want to prepare for that scenario. So you better prepare for the scenario where you're going to need to migrate. Okay, let's start wrapping up. So let's just do a quick round of promos, and then we can close our
You may need to explain what you mean by promos.
Oh yeah, that's true, because we didn't have promos in this show before, right? So promos is our shameless way to talk about the things that we're working on and promote our stuff, so that we can convert some of you beautiful people that are consuming our free content into maybe followers on our social medias, or customers in some of the projects that we're working on. So this is the promos section. Chuck, do you want to kick things off?
Sure. So I've been jumping back in a little bit on the React stuff. So top end devs, I'll try and keep this really brief, but it's hard. Anyway, so top end devs, initially we just did the podcasts. And then as I've talked to people over the last years, it's become pretty apparent that some people are just getting stuck in their careers. Now, a lot of the people that I talk to that don't know what to do next are new, right? And so they're just like, what do I do? And it's like, just keep learning, keep moving forward, keep, meeting people. But then I talk to people who have been doing this for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, and they're like, where do I go from here? Right. And so top end devs has I've kind of taken it to that next place where it's like, okay, let me help you know what to do to get to that next level of your career. Right. And the principles still apply to newer developers. It's just that the fruit is a little lower hanging for newer developers. So um anyway, what we're doing is I tell people that the three things you need to do in order to take your career to the next place are build your skills, build your network, and build your personal brand. And so we're putting together essentially systems for people to use to build their skills. And so we're putting together meetups and videos and courses and things like that, right? To build their network, we're putting together 3 times a week for our different genius plans, which are going to be React, JavaScript, and Ruby. We're going to meet 3 times a month, and we're going to talk about different stuff. So we may have somebody come and present on something one of those weeks, but the other weeks we're going to have more of a Q&A or open discussion, or we're going to have maybe members present, or a networking session or something like that, right, where we bring in some of this other stuff. And then for building your personal brand, we're also going to have content and courses about building content. And so for me, the ones that have worked best for me are YouTube and podcasting. And so that's where I'm going to push people, right? I tend to pan the blogging. You can make it work, but that's not really my cup of tea, and I don't think it's as effective. So anyway, so what I'm working on is getting launched the JavaScript geniuses and the React geniuses, and effectively getting those meetups scheduled, and then start putting out the videos. And the videos are going to be, I'm going to build this thing in React, right? So I may do it in Redwood JS or Remix or Next or Gatsby or something else. Or maybe I'll say, hey, I've got this custom backend that I built in Rails, and I'm going to build the front end on it, or whatever, right? And so then we'll build different kinds of apps, and that way you can see how some of these things go in. It's rather frustrating to me when I get in and it's like this tutorial on this toy app that doesn't really have to integrate with anything. And so it works great there. And if I follow the steps, it works great for me. And then I try and go and do it in real life, and it's like, it doesn't work. So anyway, React Geniuses is what's coming. I'm also just going to toss out there that we're getting ready to launch the premium podcasts. So if you want the podcast without the ads, you can get that. If you get any of the others, so the video series or the meetup series or both, then you'll get access to the podcast without the ads for free. So anyway, that's what I'm getting ready to launch. We should have it up here within the next week or two. So go check it out. And that'll be at reactgeniuses.com.
Nice. Awesome.
That
You might
sounds
want
awesome.
to send the link to it here. So reactgenius.com in the comments.
Yeah, I'll
section.
put it in the comments. It's not up yet, so it'll be up. My birthday is 2 weeks from today. It'll be up by then.
Okay. Peter, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, I mean, that's very awesome. Like, yeah, I know a lot of people that will actually need this, right? Because starting out, it was okay. For my own experience, starting out, it wasn't really easy, because then I was in kind of in a neighborhood where I didn't really have much access to developers and maybe people who could help and people who could mentor you and so on and so forth. But then with this, I feel this is actually going to be very nice for beginners and people who are starting out. And yeah, I think this is a very great improvement. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of tutorials are too into a perfect universe, and it ends up not being very realistic. So I appreciate the thought that Chuck is putting into making this more real world experience. All right, so my promo is gonna be Unvoid. So is unvoid.com, and they offer all kinds of full stack software development services. And we do that in a performance basis. The difference between that and every other company that provides software development services is that in every other company, you're going to pay by the hour. And you don't really know how much value you're getting from that. But at Unvoid, you're only going to pay when the tasks are delivered and approved by the client. So even if they are delivered and the client doesn't like the quality in which they are or the code standards or something like that, they can just ask for changes, and it's only going to become billable after the client says that they are adhering to a certain quality standard. So it's really the safest way for any company to outsource or staff augment their software development teams. And also, every single engineer at Unvoid works in the United States time zones. So companies don't have issues with trying to talk to their engineers and they being in a completely different time zone and not being able to talk to them. So yeah, if you're interested in that or you know someone that might benefit from that, I highly encourage you to check out unvoid.com, unvoid.com. So yeah, how about you, Chris? Do you have anything you'd like to promote?
Sure, yeah. I'm a little bit probably stretched too thin recently, so I'm just gonna keep it simple. I guess I would just point people to my blog, chrisfrew.in. I do have some other products and projects hopefully coming out. But yeah, I guess following this theme, what I really focus on in my blog is, or really how my blog started is basically whenever I would encounter anything at, you know, I've worked for startups or in industry, and it was either really hard or like a bunch of just trial and error that we all know. I would just be like, okay, I'm going to write a blog post about this, and hopefully someone will find, they ran into the same thing I ran into, and this is the solution I came up with. And so with that, along with my blog, I have various courses. So in it quite spanning quite wide languages and frameworks. So I have some TypeScript courses. I have a Golang course, and it's really focused on more. I mean, of course, you're not going to build an entire SaaS app, but they are like, I built a Go course recently that's, how to deploy it on Docker and get everything up and running. It's like a cron job service. So really trying to focus at integrating more than just one thing, in what, like some toy example. So, yeah.
By the way, I highly encourage everyone to check out Chris' website just because it's so much fun. I was just looking at it, and there are just so many random bits of rainbows and colorful things. That's a cool personal website, dude. Like that's really, really cool. I like the ASCII computer that you did on the left, and you can actually click on subscribe or close forever. I thought that was really well done. That's really interesting. Congrats.
Yeah, thanks. I've been kind of paranoid recently because I've heard stories because right now I only have dark mode. I know that's kind of like a bad practice. And people are like, if I see a website like that, I won't even read it. So maybe I have to bring back a light mode pretty soon.
Dan Benjamin used to say that.
Yeah, nice. How about you, Peter?
Yeah, I don't really have much. Yeah, I think I write articles for publications, so we find the dev, and I think I'll send the link to. So, yeah, I just write publications and random thoughts about things concerning React and so on. So you can just check refine.dev as well. Yeah, I don't know if you've worked with it. It's kind of like a very nice framework for building React applications. You can spin up your admin dashboards, your B2B applications at one go. Yeah, so I think it's something worth checking out. Let me just post the link.
And
I
what
think,
is the best place for people to read your articles?
yeah, mainly on my LinkedIn. Yeah, I just post them on my LinkedIn, right? So I think my LinkedIn is correlated with all my articles. So yeah, I just paste them on my LinkedIn. I will share my LinkedIn profile as well. So yeah, I just most of the time I'm there looking at awesome posts, like maybe migration posts. Yeah, because I really enjoyed the series of David creating on Ruby on Rails migrating. Yeah, and I just look at some other posts and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think just catch me up on LinkedIn with my post. I think that works.
Nice, nice. Okay, all right. Everyone, thank you so much for joining. It was a pleasure to meet Peter, Chris, Jack. I already know you for a while, but it's always good to be on the show with you guys. It was really nice. I really liked this format. It was a bit of a longer episode. We're maybe gonna try to keep it shorter in the next ones. But yeah, I really enjoyed how much depth we were able to put into it. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Max out, everybody.